We're going to go ahead and record. Thank you all for coming. I wanted to do a quick announcement. So all of our upcoming NAMIGO talks will be sponsored by Synexus Research. Synexus Research needs help from someone like you. Be a part of a clinical trial and do something rewarding. Their top 3 reasons to be involved are to help advance medicine. One of their studies might possibly improve the health of others. It's also to help others, which may lead to new treatments and help people live better qualities of life. And of course, be compensated. Who doesn't love that? Qualified participants may be compensated for their time and travel. Synexus Research has a vast array of studies offered at our local sites in Orlando as well as the villages, and their PTSD study might be of interest to you. Other study indications are memory loss, early Alzheimer's disease prevention, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease studies, diabetic neuropathy, low back pain, osteoarthritis in the knees, Parkinson's disease, Crohn's disease, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That's a mouthful. So please call your local community relations specialist, Deborah Snow, at 407-364-7517, or if you're interested in our PTSD study, you can visit the link, www.yourptsdstudy.com, or give them a call toll free at 866-226-9448. I'll go ahead and drop all of that information in the chat once I pass it over to Tammy. But until then, I hope you wrote it all down. So with that, I'd love to introduce our speaker for this evening, who will be presenting Tacos or Pizza, a look into the biopsychosocial factors of decision-making. Tammy, along with NAMI Greater Orlando, is going to dive into exploring the biopsychosocial factors of why humans make the choices they do and what leads to these choices. Tammy is an advanced rapid resolution therapy practitioner and a clinical mental health counseling registered intern, and is going to help us answer the long sought after question, are things predetermined or do we have free will? Do you struggle to figure out how to forgive someone or even yourself? Do you find yourself asking, why can I not get myself to start or stop doing particular behaviors? Would you like to increase your ability to do the things that align with your values? If so, then you are in the right place. This talk is a necessary step towards collectively understanding the function of human behavior and inching towards a more understanding and compassionate society. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Tammy, and we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Erin. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that okay?
I can. That looks great.
Okay. So yes, thank you again for allowing me this opportunity to present on this topic. So a little bit about me that wasn't in my bio is that I grew up in the system. So from the age of like 8 to 15, I grew up in placements, foster homes, group homes, detention centers, residential, etc. I had undiagnosed ADHD and trauma, and then it just kind of, my behavior continued, I'm assuming. I'm 43 years old, so my guess is they didn't really understand ADHD the way that they understand it today. So it kept leading through all different types of placements and therapies. And over time, it really became damaging to my identity because I would struggle and I couldn't understand why do I keep making these choices? You know, I remember thinking like I want to do better, and you know, I really struggled with it. And then traditional therapy, it has this idea that if you're not improving, then you're resistant, even if you're showing up. Even when I went to school, they would tell me things like never work harder than your client, which is really different from the modality I use now. Another thing that happened is they encouraged a lot of introspection. But for me, that turned into intellectualizing, trying to figure out like all my behaviors and things like that. And it wasn't really until much later in life where I started getting into the research of neurolaw and, biology and, more of like the different perspective on the way we behave. So before I started getting into this perspective though, I had a lot of challenges with being really hard on myself, forgiving other people for things that they did, things like that. So I'm really passionate about sharing this perspective because I know that other people have similar situations in the fact, like regarding not understanding like why they can't get themselves to do a certain thing or why is something so hard. Forgiveness, the topic of forgiveness is really popular and it's a struggle for a lot of people. So I'm excited about sharing this topic with you. So the other day I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, and we were talking about like the Baker Act laws and things like that. And they said something to me and they were like, is it psychological or behavioral? And really, I think this is how like stigma begins to happen. As a psychiatrist, I can get it to the sense of, can it be treated with medication or does it need a different approach, et cetera? But when we look at it, and we separate, is it psychological or behavioral? It's kind of implying that if it's an unacceptable, maladaptive, or non-normative behavior, then one must be insane or crazy or just not within any control. But if it's behavioral, then a person could get the stigma of being a bad person, making poor choices, choosing, not caring, and different things like that. And what the research is coming to find is that's absolutely not true. That we don't make, I'll get into it more, but we don't necessarily, we become aware of our choices after we've made them. So. I want to start out with a little experiment just to kind of feel what it's like when we're doing things. I want you to go ahead and look at something in front of you, in like a water bottle, pen, anything. And I want you to pick it up. And then I want you to like just look at it, hold it, set it back down. And then I want you to just tap the top of your head and then tap your ear. And then you could stop. So think about that. Did you do all of the things that I asked? Did you think about doing them or did you just do them? How did you decide what object to pick up and where to put the object back down? Did you have mental rules about what you did? Like, for example, if we're having a drink, does it have to be a certain distance from the computer? If you didn't do the activity, why and how did you feel as the activity went on? If you did the activity, how would you have felt if you did not participate? If you followed the instructions, does that make you a good person? If you don't follow the instructions, does that make you a bad person? And when we're looking at behavior, we tend to think of it in those aspects, that good people do good things, bad people do bad things. And we have such a diet of consequences and morality in society that we learn very early that if we're not doing something good, we have a consequence. And therefore, in order to do good, we must feel bad if we're not doing good. So Robert Sapolsky, he's an American neuroscientist, professor of biology, neuroscience, neurosurgery at Stanford, research associate at the National Museum of Kenya. He has a bachelor's in biology and anthropology from Harvard, a PhD in neuroendocrinology from Rockefeller Center. And he's written several books on human behavior. So we're gonna watch just 2 questions out of this video. Keep in mind, there is one section where he talks about research and it has to do with religion. Feel free to take off the labels because it would happen It just so happened to be between Christians and Muslim, but he's just talking about in group think. So it's not really, you know, like specifically towards them. So hold on. Share screen. And
you say that there is no free will. What exactly do you mean by free will? Because it seems to confuse lots of people.
Sure. And, you know, I've been forced to read all sorts of philosophers who write about free will, and it's agony because I don't understand what they're saying. And they're terrible writers, and I'm a terrible reader, and it's very hard. And they have endless definitions of free will. Provisionally, I'm using kind of a reductive definition, and it's obviously silly, but it's still how at the end of the day you need to think. Someone does a behavior. They take their finger and it does that. Their brain tells them to do that to their finger. That's like as simple, fundamental of a behavior as you can imagine. And it's totally inconsequential action that happens to be very consequential because you're pulling a trigger. Whoa, okay, so this is the production of behavior that really matters. And neurobiologists can go and find the neuron in your motor cortex, which sent the signal to those muscles to flex. And you could find the neurons in what are called the premotor cortex, which sent signals, which triggered that motor cortex to send that signal. And you could then find neurons in the frontal cortex that trigger that, and find neurons in the prefrontal cortex that trigger that, and neurons in emotional parts of the brain that trigger those neurons. And basically show me the neuron that started that cascade, a neuron that fired, that had an action potential for no reason whatsoever. A neuron whose firing was not regulated by the physical laws of the universe, that happened for no prior causal antecedent reason. Show me a neuron that started that and that works that way, and then we could talk about free will. You've just shown me some sort of neurobiological building block for free will, and it's just not there. There's no causeless cause. There's nothing in the biology of our behavior that just happens from out of nowhere. Every single biological event that we have has a history.
And what about, for example, something very, very complex? Because from all the objections we received in the comment section when we announced the topic, lots of people actually say that their conscious thought, there's some action that they really thought through, something that they did using self-control, a choice that they make not by some spontaneous emotion and just wanting something, but actually thought it through, that is example of free will.
And unfortunately, I think that's nonsense. And the best way to show that is the endless ways in which we behave for reasons that we're not even conscious of. Here's one study. You take Christian people, and in this study, you look at attitudes towards Muslims, how much hostility there is or isn't, and there's music playing in the background. And if you happen to be playing church music at a very low volume versus classical music, if you're playing church music, people express more hostility to members of other religions. If you've just walked down a street and either you walk down this way or this way, and this way has a church in it, and you've just walked past a church, in a questionnaire afterward, you are likely to be more hostile to members of other religions. If you put somebody in a room and you have them fill out a questionnaire about their political attitudes. Should abortion be legal? Should gay marriage be legal? Things of that sort. If you have a horrible, rotten smell in that room, if it smells like rotting garbage in there, people become more socially conservative. They become more socially intolerant. On the other hand, if you have somebody playing an economic game where they have to make decisions about generosity, if they're sitting in a room and it smells like chocolate chip cookies that have just come out of the oven, and this is actual scientific studies, you could buy a little vial of chocolate chip smell or a little vial of like rotting carcass smell or whatever, and people would like do that in the studies. If you're smelling freshly baked bread or cookies, people become more generous. And nobody is going to sit there and attribute their behavior to those factors. One incredibly important study looking at more than 5,000 decisions that judges made in courtrooms, and the single best predictor of whether they were going to parole someone, allow them to go free, or send them back to jail for another whatever number of years, the single best predictor was how many hours it had been since the judge had eaten a meal. If you appeared before the judge right after you had lunch, 60% chance of being freed. By 2 hours later, 0% chance. And that study has stood up to all sorts of like challenges and such. And no judge, if you sat them down there and asked them to use their conscious awareness to say, whoa, that's really interesting. You freed that guy, but this guy you sent back to jail. How come? They're going to cite some philosopher that they learned about their first year in college. They're not going to say, because of my blood glucose levels, an enormous percentage of our behavior is occurring without our consciousness. And what is very often the case, and neurobiology proves this, is when we think we are making a conscious decision, especially a conscious moral decision, we have emotionally decided long before that, seconds before that, and our conscious, rational, cerebral part of the brain is just making up an explanation.
Can you see that again?
Looks great.
So I like what he said in the video when he was talking about nothing ever happens without a cause. Causelessness does not exist. So going forward, we'll be talking about this in terms of like the subconscious being the menu and information getting on the menu. And really that's, it only has from the menu to pull from. So if it's not on the menu, it's really, it's showing like in the research that we make decisions 1/10 of a second up until like 8 seconds before we're even consciously aware of it. So from the presentation, I want you to be able to gain a general understanding of the biopsychosocial factors of decision-making, gain insight into the impact of moralistic perspective, gain insight into the states of consciousness and decision-making, and gain a general understanding to be able to make decisions that align with your values and intentions. So moralistic perspective is really a way to control behavior. We don't want to live in a society where we're in fear of somebody, harming us or things like that. So it's necessary for social structure, but when it comes to the way we behave, it doesn't exactly align with how we function. So the downsides of that is, there's stigmas and stereotypes and divide in society. Behavior is often promoted with shame, guilt, fear, and anxiety. A decrease in desirable behaviors, reduction in confidence and confusion to identity and harm. It drains your energy because there's emotions that are constantly on, preoccupation and things like that. Negative cognition and preoccupation, and it's really hard to forgive and let go when somebody has done something that hurt us, or even ourselves, if we did something that, you know, we reflect on and doesn't feel very good. So when we get more into the function of how we behave and kind of use morals and values just as like a guideline, but don't really apply them to the function of behavior, then it begins to create an understanding that breaks down barriers and stigmas regarding our behavior. It helps us maintain clarity and builds more compassion towards ourselves and others, because our behaviors are not being promoted by anxiety, fear, and preoccupation and things like that. It generates an understanding that promotes connection with others, fosters learning new ways and getting more agreement for positive behavior modification, reduces risk for trauma and damage to identity. And the more people that can see through this lens, the less guilt and shame there is in society. So there's all types of different fields that, you know, have ideas about free will and how we behave and things like that. So just for the sake of this presentation, going forward, if you could just look through this lens with me, just really try it on, be objective. I know it's kind of like a controversial topic, but if you just look through this lens with me through the presentation, that would be useful. Thank you. So I want you to think of a time where you did something, or you wish you didn't do it, or somebody did something to you, or you struggled to do something differently, and it was problematic for you. And I want you to think of that just for a moment and kind of rate it on a scale of like 0 to 10. 0, it didn't affect you. So if that's the case, try to pick something that's, you know, a 3 or more. And up to a 10, meaning you're still having trouble with it. So when I was saying behavior is a manifestation of an internal state, behavior is like the end result of everything that happens inside the body physiologically, within the mind, and things like that. So the menu, I'm going to refer to that as like the subconscious, and our access to the menu really it's based on our physiology and our emotions. Because when, you know, like they were saying with the judges, you know, it affects their, the way that they view things. There was another study where they tested people having to use the bathroom, and cognitive functioning, it, you know, decreased. So if we're hungry, if we're sleepy, all of that like will have an effect on like how we are thinking, how we're perceiving things, our understanding of things, and, you know, ultimately it's going to affect our end result of the behavior. So emotions, we have 7 basic emotions. Emotions are physical, they're energy in the body, and their intention is to get us to do something to help keep us safe. Feelings is a little bit different than emotions, even though sometimes people will describe their emotion as a feeling, but feeling is really an awareness of what we're experiencing. People have a strong desire to feel heard, understood, connecting with, you know, other people. So through feelings is kind of like how we express that, which is a little bit different than the emotions that are energizing our body to do something. And then thoughts are physical as well. We can see them in the brain when they do different types of neuroimaging and things like that. So all of those things then result in a behavior. So when we as a society, we're looking at the behavior, we're not really looking in, you know, clearly understanding in detail all of the things that led up to that. We're just seeing the behavior, and if we like it or not, then we think it either should have happened or should not have happened. So the neurobiology, there's so much to this, so I only picked out a few things that I felt were kind of important to get the visual. So feelings and emotions, sensations, senses, topographical maps, image schemas, and frames. So how we gather the information that gets stored in the subconscious. Most of us are pretty familiar with the initial 5, which is sound, taste, sight, touch, smell. We also have 2 more. So proprioception, I like to think of this like cat whiskers, because it helps us understand the relationship between our body and things around us. And then vestibular is more with gravity. So it's understanding motion and our relationship to the ground and helps us stabilize. So the 7 basic emotions that I was talking about, I like to say that they're like the brain's email service. They're a way that the mind has the ability to communicate with you to get you to do something about information that it's understanding. And when I talk about the moralistic perspective, I want to start with the emotion of disgust, because originally in primates, disgust was something that happened when they would eat something toxic or a spoiled food, right? So they would be disgusted to get it back up out of their body so that they could survive. And think about today, morality is so ingrained in every part of our culture that we could look at a human's behavior and be disgusted by it, as if it's physically within our body in trying to get that out. Contempt, originally, like with primates, contempt is a way to kind of become the leader of the pack. Paul Ekman did a lot of research on emotions, some of the body language, you can see the face, but also another thing is people that are in that emotion will sometimes like lift their neck, it exposes the jugular. So it's kind of like a challenging type of an emotion to keep status. Then we have anger. Anger has really a negative connotation because, you know, people think of the feeling of being angry, and what comes up a lot of times is behaviors that are a result of being angry. But anger, really what that means is it wants to start or stop something that's out of our control. So, I mean, it's a very useful emotion momentarily, right? The thing with anger, though, a lot of times, if it's something that has happened, the emotion being on at that point isn't very useful for our bodies because we can't go back and change what happened, right? So what happens with anger as well is anytime we get anger, fear, sadness, things like that, when we're in that fight or flight, or even if it's on to any level, there's no future. Because if we're thinking, if we feel threatened, you know, we're not interested in knowing what's for dinner. We're trying to handle the threat, right? And that's what causes some of these preoccupations. You know, mind's trying to figure out, what do I need to do to, you know, make this different for the human. Fear, same thing. We lose the ability to have forward thinking, future, you know, that's pretty much shut down. With anger and fear as well, digestion slows down because we don't need that. Anger, you get energy to the jaw. Fear, you get energy to the legs. And then there's heart rate and respiratory and things like that. If we have anger turned on for a while, anger is the motivator to change a behavior that already happened or to get something that happened. And if mind is, you know, somewhere in the subconscious still processing that information, and a person doesn't feel like there's anything that they can do about it, then they start to feel hopeless, helpless, depressed. So that's one type of sadness or depression. And another type of sadness is just when we lose somebody or something, and we're recognizing that loss. Joy is really a feeling that is an internal state. So when there's no threat and the mind's not processing data at some level of a threat, whether we are aware of it or not, then we can experience the joy. And then surprise is just kind of to alert us to something in our environment. So the subconscious and the conscious mind, the conscious is like a very small portion. You know, we're not aware of things for very long, 7 seconds or less. And so the subconscious mind is really doing all this work. And it puts things on a scale. Either I like this, I will continue, or I don't like this, I will die. And the language sounds very simple, but the language of the subconscious and the language of the conscious mind are really different. So if you think about the cost and benefits analysis of human behavior, you know, if the house is on fire and you're watching your favorite show, obviously, one is going to take priority over the other, and it's not going to be your favorite show. There's another a type of cost and benefits analysis where if we do something that we don't like, then we can think to ourselves, well, I do things that I don't like, you know, I go towards things that are uncomfortable. However, at the end of the day, I think it was Immanuel Kant that talked about this, but we can never do anything that's not self-interested. So say a friend asked me to come paint their house and it's 100 degrees and it's outside and I have ADHD and painting a house sounds like zero fun. If I go and help them paint the house, it's not because I'm going to be happy about painting the house, but it's going to be because if I don't go paint their house, then I'm going to feel awful about who I am as a person, or feel guilty, or feel really bad about not doing that. So in order to alleviate my discomfort of that, one takes priority. So painting the house then becomes more valuable than not painting the house. And same thing, going to the gym or staying on the couch. At some level, you know, one is going to take priority over another. It just depends on how the mind is processing that data. So the subconscious mind is really like the menu. It stores everything that we know, and it's the program from which we operate. The subconscious mind understands things very differently from our our conscious mind. And the subconscious mind evaluates things on a scale of, I like this, I will continue, or I don't like this, I will die. So we have topographical maps are found in the sensory system and the motor system and other parts of the brain. And what they do is they organize things so that it's set up so it can access the information quickly. So the more we do something, the easier it gets programmed and the more automatic it becomes, because our minds are, at the end of the day, only conscious of 2% of everything that our mind is understanding. So 98% of what's happening within our mind, in our body, goes unnoticed, or we're not really aware of it. It's just kind of happening, and it's running off the program, and we're conscious of 2% of that. So another way it can be described is the body's map of what it may experience through all of the senses. Another thing that shows up with topographical maps, like say somebody has an accident and lose a limb. The topographical maps understands the whole body as it was, because that programming is there. Like the frames don't change. So when people get the phantom limb syndrome, that's what it's caused from, because the inner mind is already programmed, and it's running off of that program, and it's not updated because that groundwork is there. So we're going to watch another quick video. This one's only 2 minutes. Share screen. How do I make this smaller? Oh, there we go.
Maybe not responsibility.
Sorry. So this is just going to give you like a visual.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
So the way that the mind, all the information that we get, it stores in our brains. It creates these maps for quicker access. If we're not accessing something frequently, it can fade out. The more we access something, the quicker it becomes, the more it clusters together to make easier access to it. So I want you to just have this visual. So we get all of this information coming in through our senses, and we're only conscious of 2% of that. If we were conscious of all of it, we would get really, really overwhelmed. And I can't imagine if feeling what that would feel like. So we get all this information that comes into the brain, and keep in mind that how we're thinking, how we're feeling, our understanding of something based on a previous experience is going to alter the way that we're understanding all that information that gets in. But as it comes into the body, it's still getting programmed through our perception, and our perception can be very different than what is actually kind of happening. Think about when there's an accident or something. If several different people were going to make a report about that accident, it would vary to some degree because the perceptions are different. So frames and image schemas. Frames are like the container, and the image schema is just all the things that go into that. And these two together, it has all the information that we know. It helps with the cause and effects, the sequence, comparing and contrasting categories, and connecting ideas. So, it's optimizing and setting your brain up to be able to pull from this information that's already there and predict the behavior and then cause that behavior to happen. A little more about frames to make it kind of more of a visual type thing. So if we think of a beach, or any of these words that are on the screen, if we think of one of these places, automatically, if I think of a beach, I'm thinking of sand, water, the sound of the ocean, and the sound of the waves, maybe birds. If it's nighttime, the stars, I'm not consciously necessarily focusing on that unless I, also bring that to mind. But it just all comes at the same time. So our brains are just processing so much information like all the time. So just to kind of, because I know it's like a lot of information. So I just want you to get the idea that information comes in through our senses. You know, we have this top-down experience, so brain to body, and then we have this body to brain experience, and it's constantly being filtered, and it's constant. You know, we're only aware of 2% of all of that goes on, and our minds are also always scanning the environment for things that are a danger to us and things of relevance. So some of the psychological factors, again, I only picked out a few things. Embodied cognition and metaphors, conscious, subconscious, creative subconscious mind, negation and thoughts, which as a RT practitioner, we call that data. So every word that we know, we have to be able to feel it or put a sense to it in order to determine whether it's safe or not. So when we think of up, you know, we can sense it's up here. Down, we can sense it's here. If we have our hand close and we're like here, we can feel that there. We're, you know, if you say these words and kind of think about them, you're actually experiencing them as you're thinking about them. You know, going away from me, we can kind of feel that and sense that. It's an experience when we talk, and you know, it's through neurolinguistics programming and some of that training. The way all of our words really matter, and the way that we understand language creates our reality. So now look at the next slide here, and notice when you're thinking about down but looking up, or thinking about up but looking down, saying the word there but kind of holding your hands close to you, or saying here and holding your hand out, there's going to be a conflict. There's going to be an emotion. Your body's sensing like, hey, something's off. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And then again, we can feel when we say coming towards me. So every word that we know, we feel. And when it goes into frames, and then we get like the schemas around it, it creates this like movie slide. So our minds are really kind of putting things into like a movie. And so we're operating off of that movie. So our conscious mind, it's our awareness, all of our perception. We're not conscious of things for very long, 7 seconds or less. We can demonstrate this by, if I say, I want you to think of a blue apple. However many seconds it was before you had another thought is being conscious of that. So our minds are going like super, super fast all the time. And then what's coming in through our perception is going straight to our subconscious mind. So anytime that our conscious world doesn't match the programming that's in our subconscious mind, what happens is we have this creative subconscious mind that's going to cause emotions, change perception, do all of these different things in order to try to get them to match. Because if they're not matching, we're feeling like our reality is off. This works in several different ways though. If you go and you're sitting in your chair every day, and then all of a sudden you go to sit in your chair and you see it, but you go right through it, that would really throw you off because it doesn't make sense. It's not what's in the pre-programming. If somebody doesn't believe that they're attractive and another person comes up to them and they say, wow, you're very attractive, it's going to make that person feel uncomfortable because in the subconscious mind, that's the information that they're running off of. And now their reality has just had a conflict with that. So it's going to create these emotions, and it's going to modify behaviors and, sometimes cause us to do different things because it's interested in keeping the subconscious mind the reality. And then we have the reticular activating system. It's actually in the back of the brain. It helps scan our environment for things that have value according to our subconscious mind. A couple examples of this: if you just buy a car and next thing you know, you're noticing like, oh, that person has this car. You start seeing it like more frequently. Another way is if you live near the airport. At first it's gonna, you're gonna notice it. After a while, you're not gonna notice it because it loses relevance because it already knows it's not dangerous. A few other ways: if somebody maybe had a traumatic experience and they thought it had something to do with the way that they looked, they will begin to do things to change their perception of how they dress, how they, their hygiene, changing their hair, different things like that. Is because however we are in our subconscious mind, we want that to be the reality. And if we have something that, in this case, it would be thinking that being attractive cause harm, then our mind would try to protect us. So, those are a couple different ways in which our creative subconscious will help make these things match and keep us safe. So when I was talking about the, perception changing, we have over 50 cognitive biases. So cognition is the way that we think. And so if we're perceiving something and we're not in a really good mood, we're gonna see faces differently. We're going to, our reticular activating system is gonna find the things that match the way we feel, not match the way we wanna feel. So it kind of keeps perpetuating that cycle of feeling to reality. Another one is like the halo effect. When we see, when we admire something about somebody, then we kind of disregard any red flags or any other behaviors that could be problematic because we're looking at them in this whole different light. Confirmation bias, you see that a lot when people are wanting to express their point. They're only looking for the research that matches their opinion, and that's what shows up on their radar. So it's not necessarily always intentional. It's just what their radar, this reticular activating system, is scanning for and picking up on. Let me give you another example. So if you're going shopping during a holiday and the whole parking lot is really, really full, your mind is going to notice, reverse lights from 3 rows over that normally you would never pay attention to, but it's in the subconscious mind as being, a priority, a value, something that you need. So it's going to pick that up. So if somebody's going through and they're trying to express their point and get heard and things like that, their mind is going to be picking up ways to make that happen for them. So, there's over 50 of them. It would be too long to go through much more of them. But another thing is our minds can't negate things. So if I say, don't look up, it's kind of hard. At first we want to be like, what? And we'll look up. Or, don't think of a circus tent. Don't think of the red and white stripes. Our mind's going to think of that first because it has to go into our senses. It has to process within the subconscious mind, and then we become conscious of it. So,
Tammy, I read that a minute ago, and I couldn't stop thinking of a circus tent the whole time you were talking there. So I just kept daydreaming about the circus tent because it was right there in front of me.
Yeah. So think of that in terms of like when we're involving ourselves around a lot of negative conversation. Our minds are hearing this, and it doesn't separate, you know, it doesn't really have reason until after we become conscious of it. But by that time, it's already been processed through the subconscious mind. So, you know, being careful, I guess I'll get to that part more towards the end, but our brains hear everything, whether we want them to or not, because it has to process it to make sure that we're safe. So our subconscious mind, we act in accordance with the truth as we believe it to be true. So, you know, in that sense, when we're, I think this is really important to know, and to know this so that you can be, or attempt to be, more objective. So realize like all the ways in which your mind tries to protect you and will change the way you view things to match how it's already, like, you know, been stored into your mind. And also to add to that, when it's stored into your mind, it also then is stored into your body. So, you know, it's a whole experience, not just within your mind, within your body, but then you're sensing it within your surroundings. So everything then creates this reality based on your subconscious mind. You know, if we are, you know, I think the way that we talk to ourselves is very important. But it's not like the whole picture, because say you're really unhappy and then I come up and say, well, you are happy. You're going to be like, well, no, I'm not. There's going to be a lot of conflict. Or what if you're trying to tell yourself, you know, I am happy, I am this, I am that. That if you're saying it in a certain tense, there's going to still be a conflict. So, you know, little nuances, like instead of saying, I am happy, when you're not happy, the brain is going to reject that. So things like, I see myself feeling good in the future. I know if I've been unhappy before and happy again, then I could be happy sometime in the future. And I'm seeing myself and I'm noticing what that feels like, you know. So like all of the words that we say matter. And kind of, I didn't touch on this, I forgot to, but you know, with like the 7 basic emotions, that was another thing like I ran into a lot when I was in, you know, placements, going through all these different types of groups and, you know, counseling and all that. They would always say things like, well, sit with your emotions, sit with the anger. It is physically draining to our body. I kind of think of their logic on that as like the Ferber method or the cry it out method. But the only reason, like say we're feeling anger, is because our mind is processing information, thinking it could do something about it right then and there. An emotion on for more than 90 seconds within our body isn't even physically good for us. So I think sometimes the way that some traditional therapies think about the way we encourage people. So there's a difference. I do want to clarify, because it's important to validate somebody's feelings and experiences, but we want to validate them and connect with them, and then become interested in thinking in a new way. So, you know, that's kind of part of the modality that I use and the way that we view it. But we want to get the subconscious mind interested in being where it would like to be instead of where it is, if there's discomfort. So just for time, the sociological factors, I didn't really do that many slides on these, just because think about the social factors are all the ways that our mind gets programmed. And we're not in control of all of the ways that our mind, you know, we're seeing things, you know, think of that, you know, that 2%, that 98% is going, you know, through our minds, and our minds can't negate it. So we're seeing it and understanding it, whether we want to or not. we're just not necessarily consciously aware of it. So, you know, we want to connect, we want to be liked, we want to be accepted by others. You know, groupthink, social norms, we want, you know, those are some of the things that get us accepted. We certainly aren't interested in getting in trouble, but the government and, you know, political views and law, and it has a huge view of morality. In fact, the law separates thought and action, but neuroscience doesn't really see that as how it happens. Marketing, we're constantly getting some type of marketing. You know, when Robert Sapolsky was talking about the different scents, you know, when you go out shopping during the holidays, there's this smell and that smell and, you know, this type of music, you know, all of that is meant to cause behavior to go a certain way. You know, our interest in our needs. This is really kind of what takes priority. So say somebody wants us to go out and hang out and do all this stuff. If we have to go to work or do something that's a priority to, you know, keep our safety, then, you know, one's gonna take priority over the other. People that are, you know, working on safety aren't necessarily, you know, interested in, you know, creating other areas of their life. They have a priority of safety and things like that first. Different religions, and I'm not really speaking good or bad or anything like that, but they influence the way that we view behavior. You know, that's a really heavy influence because it also is something that brings people together. And even things like standardized testing. If we don't test in a certain way, then now we're in a class or a group, you know, that if I can't test a certain way, not based on my knowledge of it, but my ability to do that type of testing, then that will create a stigma as well. So, I mean, there's so many different social factors that go into this. And, you know, so think about it like this. So say you wanted to go get Greek food, right? So you go up to the restaurant and however, it's an Italian restaurant, right? Well, it's kind of hard to get baklava from, you know, the Italian restaurant. You're probably not going to get it. So if things are going into our subconscious mind and it gives it a value and a priority, and our emotions are going to limit the access to what we're able to go on. So somebody could really want to do something, but if the programming in the subconscious mind is not in alignment with what they want to do as a priority, then it's going to be hard for them to do it right away. So in a sense, you know, we don't have free will in the moment, but what we can do is we can see like, oh, I like that program over there. I would really I think that's interesting and valuable. And then we could work to try to get our minds subconsciously updated, where then we can automatically go from that program. So we have free will to a degree, but not technically in the action of behavior. So I wanted to check in with you guys. And the question that I asked in the beginning about, you know, if you did something that you kind of regretted or somebody did something that was hurtful. If we think about that in the sense of how our minds are already pre-programmed and just kind of running off of that pre-programming, you know, behavior isn't even good or bad until it's understood through somebody's perception. So behavior, it's not necessarily modified by us being a good or bad person. It's modified by likes and dislikes once it can get on the menu. But when it comes to the way that people are viewing behavior, because there's so much under the surface that they can't see, then they're just applying this, you know, good and bad, right and wrong. They were interested or not interested. They care or didn't care, you know, type of perspective. They can't see everything that's under the surface and how it like formulated to that end result. If it was a physical, I don't want to say behavior, but a physical, lost for words here. A physical process, like say somebody was in a wheelchair and they were not able to walk. We would never get upset with them if they couldn't go on a walk with us, like standing up, because our minds could see it. But because our minds can't see what's under the iceberg when it comes to human behavior and how it all got there, and, you know, twisted through experience and perception and things like that, and resulting in things that, you know, may be harmful to the person or harmful to other people, then we judge it. But it never occurs to us to judge something that we can physically see. But the, you know, the research is coming out and it's showing that we're emotionally deciding things, you know, between 1/10 of a second and, you know, I think up to 8 or 10 seconds before we even have conscious awareness and, you know, of the behavior. So is anybody who, you know, thought of one of those questions, has there been a shift or a different understanding from when we started?